I need you to stop whatever you are doing and think about one thing. Think about the most generous thing you have ever done for someone you love. The thing that cost you something real, time, money, comfort, sacrifice. The thing you did without being asked twice, without conditions, without keeping score. Now imagine finding out that the person you did it for quietly agreed to cut you out of the very moment your sacrifice made possible. That is what happened to me. At 68, I wrote a check for $84,000 so my daughter could have the wedding of her dreams. 3 months later, a wedding program arrived in my mailbox, mailed by accident from the venue, and my name was not in it. Not once. Not anywhere. But that is not the end of the story. Because I am not the kind of man who falls apart quietly. I was the kind of man who picked up the phone and made one calm, precise call that set everything in motion. Stay with me until the very end, because what happens at that reception is something you will not see coming. If this is your first time on this channel, subscribe right now and turn on the notification bell. Every day we bring you real stories about real people who refuse to be treated as less than what they are. Now, let us begin. I was sitting on my porch on a Wednesday afternoon in May when the mail arrived. The mail carrier left a small stack in the box. I walked down, sorted through it at the gate the way I always do. Bills, a circular, a letter from my insurance company, and at the bottom, a thick ivory envelope with gold-embossed lettering in the top left corner. Whitmore Estate venue and events. I assumed it was a receipt. Some kind of formal confirmation related to the funds I had wired 3 months ago. I carried everything inside, settled at the kitchen table with my reading glasses, and opened it. It was not a receipt. It was the official printed wedding program for Joanna, my daughter, and Blake's ceremony, beautiful, detailed, and clearly the final version. I turned the pages slowly, the way you read something you expect to be good news. Joanna's name was there. Blake's name. The ceremony order, the scripture readings, the wedding party listed in full. I read carefully, looking for my name the way a man looks for himself in a group photograph. I found the line about the processional. Escorted down the aisle by Mr. Conrad Whitfield, Blake's father. I turned the page. Then I went back. I read the entire program from the first line to the last. My name was not in it. Not in the processional. Not in the acknowledgments. Not in the list of those being honored. Not in a single line of that entire document. I took my glasses off and set them on the table. Miriam's grocery list was still pinned to the refrigerator where she had left it 3 years ago. I had never been able to take it down. I sat in the kitchen and listened to how quiet the house was. Let me tell you what $84,000 actually was. It was not a number I arrived at easily or a figure I could replace with a phone call to a bank. It was 37 years of my life and my late wife Miriam's life, stacked together dollar by careful dollar. It was overtime shifts I worked at the post office when Joanna was in middle school because her school needed a music program fee we had not budgeted for. It was the vacation Miriam and I canceled 3 years running, so the savings account would grow instead. It was the department store job Miriam took for 4 years, evenings and weekends, because she said she wanted Joanna to have choices we never had. When Miriam passed from a stroke 3 years ago, she left behind every dollar she had ever contributed to that account. Her name was still on the original savings paperwork. Every dollar in that account carried her fingerprints. The Sunday Joanna came to the house in tears, she and Blake sat across from me at this same kitchen table. They explained that the Whitmore Estate required full payment up front, and that between the two of them, they were significantly short. They looked at me with the particular combination of hope and guilt that only a child asking a parent for something large can produce. I asked one question. Is this what you both truly want? They said yes. I wrote the check for $84,000, drawn from the account with Miriam's name still on the original paperwork. Joanna hugged me for a long time. Blake shook my hand firmly and looked me in the eye. You have no idea what this means to us, he said. I watched their car pull out of my driveway, feeling the particular satisfaction of a parent who has done something irreversible out of love. I would not feel that way again for a long time. I need to tell you about Joanna and about the woman who got between us before I could see it happening. Joanna is my only child. I raised her alongside Miriam through the years when money was tight and through the years when it was less so. I taught her to drive in an empty church parking lot on a Saturday morning, both of us laughing when she hit the curb the same way 3 times in a row. I sat beside her hospital bed when she had her appendix out at 19 and held her hand until she fell asleep. I danced with her in the kitchen the night she called to tell me she had gotten her first real job. Both of us in our socks on the linoleum, Miriam watching from the doorway with her hand over her mouth, so we would not hear her laughing. That was Joanna. Then she met Blake, and Blake came with a family. Specifically, Blake came with Patrice. Patrice was Blake's mother, polished, socially precise, and privately convinced that image and presentation were the truest measure of a person. I had met her twice before the wedding planning began. Both times she had been warm and pleasant and had asked me questions that felt slightly off. What did I do before retiring? Where did I live? Where had Joanna attended school? At the time I told myself she was simply getting to know me. A mother learning about her son's future family. I understand now that she was not getting to know me. She was measuring me, and I did not score well enough on whatever scale she was using. The change in Joanna was not sudden. It never is with these things. It was slow, the way a river changes course gradually, so slowly that you only notice the shift when you look back and see how far it has moved from where it used to run. I noticed. I just did not act on what I noticed. That was my mistake. I called Joanna 3 times that Wednesday evening. 3 times the phone rang through to voicemail. 3 times I heard her voice on the recording, bright and cheerful, asking me to leave a message. I left one on the 3rd call. I kept it short. I said I had received something in the mail from the venue, and I would like her to call me when she had a moment. I did not say what it was. I set the program on the kitchen table beside my reading glasses and sat with it for a long time. Then I opened the notebook I keep in the study drawer and began writing. I am a retired postal worker. 30 years of sorting, organizing, and making sure every item reaches the right destination had built in me the habit of putting things in order. So I put everything in order. I wrote down every conversation about the wedding over the past 3 months. Every phone call. Every time I had asked about plans and received a vague answer. The planning meetings I was never included in. The dress-fitting Joanna attended with Patrice, not with me. The rehearsal dinner. I had assumed the invitation was coming. I had been waiting for it the way you wait for something you consider certain. It had never come. I wrote down the moment Joanna had mentioned, very briefly, that Patrice had some ideas about the ceremony flow and that things were going to be kept simple. I had nodded and said that sounded fine. I wrote that down too. Each detail, standing alone, had seemed harmless. The way individual threads seem harmless until you step back and see the pattern they form together. Looking at that notebook page, I saw the pattern clearly for the first time. This had not happened by accident. It had been constructed carefully, quietly over 3 months. While I smiled and said everything sounded fine. I closed the notebook. I did not sleep well that night. 2 days after the program arrived, my phone rang at 10:30 in the morning. The name on the screen was one I had saved only once, briefly, at an engagement dinner 6 months ago when Joanna introduced me to Blake's wedding party. A number I had stored out of habit and never used. Darnell. Blake's best man. I answered. Darnell began speaking before I said a single word. His voice was quick and businesslike, the tone of a young man working through a task list. He mentioned seating arrangements, referenced a caterer contact, and then asked, still without pausing, whether the situation with the bride's father had been sorted out yet. I did not speak. I simply listened. Darnell continued for approximately 30 seconds before something. Perhaps my silence, perhaps a sound in the background, made him stop. He said my name, not with certainty, with the cautious tone of a man who suddenly suspects he has dialed the wrong number. I told him who I was. The apology that followed was genuine but brief. He ended the call quickly. I sat with the phone in my hand. The situation with the bride's father. That was the phrase. Not an oversight. Not a misunderstanding. A situation. The language of something known, discussed, and actively managed among people who were not me. I called Darnell back within the hour. I was calm. I told him I had one question, and I would not ask anything else after it. I asked whether he was aware that the person who had paid for the entire wedding, every dollar of it, had not been invited to attend. The silence that followed lasted long enough to answer without words. Darnell talked for 15 minutes. He was uncomfortable, and he let that discomfort lead him somewhere honest. He told me that Patrice had gone to Joanna approximately 6 weeks after the funds were transferred. He said she had framed the conversation carefully, not as cruelty, but as practicality. She had talked about the visual flow of the wedding photographs. She had talked about the social profile of the ceremony and the impression it would make on the guests she and Conrad had invited. She had told Joanna that it would be cleaner, smoother, and more elegant if the processional reflected the Whitfield family's presentation. She had told Joanna that I would understand. Darnell said Joanna had pushed back the first time. He knew this because Blake had mentioned it to him. But Patrice was patient and persistent, and over the following weeks the pushback softened and then stopped entirely. I thanked Darnell and ended the call. Then I sat at my kitchen table and thought about what I was going to do. I did not want a confrontation. I did not want lawyers or arguments or a scene at the wedding that Joanna would carry as a painful memory for the rest of her life. What I wanted was something more precise than that. I thought about Patrice. I thought about what she had built her entire strategy around. Image. Social presentation. How things looked in a room full of people whose opinion she valued. I picked up my phone and made one call. Not to Joanna. Not to Blake. Not to a lawyer or an old friend. I called the Whitmore Estate venue and asked to speak with the coordinator who had processed the payment. Her name was Beverly. When Beverly came on the line, I introduced myself as the account holder who had wired the full $84,000 for the upcoming Joanna and Blake booking. I made one simple, professional request. I asked Beverly to update the official payment record with a complete source annotation. I wanted the file to clearly document that the funds had originated from a single private savings account held jointly in the names of Franklin and the late Miriam, paid in full and entirely by me alone. Beverly confirmed the amendment without hesitation. She was professional and thorough, exactly the kind of person you want handling important records. She told me a corrected receipt would be on file immediately. I thanked her and ended the call. I opened my notebook and wrote one word. Done. That same night, I wrote the letter to Joanna. 4 pages in my steadiest handwriting. I wrote the way Miriam always taught me to communicate. Say what is true, say it clearly, and say it only once. I described the check. I described the program. I described what those savings represented and why they were never simply money. I told her I would not attend a wedding where I was not welcome as myself. I told her I loved her in a way that did not require her to be perfect. I sealed the letter and set it beside the program on the kitchen table. The following morning Blake called. He had spoken with Darnell. His voice was quiet and steady. Not the voice of a man performing concern, but the voice of a man who had learned something significant about his own wedding and was sitting with the weight of it. He asked if we could meet. Without Joanna. Without Patrice. We met at a diner a few miles from my house. Blake sat across from me and did not offer excuses. He looked at me directly and asked me one question. Tell me what you want. I told him simply. I wanted to walk my daughter down the aisle at the wedding her parents paid for. That was all. Nothing more than that. Blake nodded once. Something shifted in his face that told me the next move now belonged to him. Blake arranged for Joanna to come to my house 2 days later. No Patrice. No Blake. No rehearsed talking points prepared in advance. Just my daughter walking up the porch steps the way she had done 1,000 times before, except this time she moved carefully, the way a person moves when they are not sure of the ground beneath them. We sat at the kitchen table. For a while neither of us spoke in any way that mattered. We talked around the edges of things, the weather, her work, small familiar subjects that neither of us cared about in that moment. I let her find her footing. I had nowhere else to be. Then I asked her one question. What would your mother think of this? The room went very quiet. Joanna cried. I did not. I handed her a tissue and I waited. She told me everything. The conversation with Patrice, and how it had started as something that sounded almost reasonable. How it had been framed as a gift to her. Less complexity, smoother logistics, a cleaner ceremony. How Patrice had said it so many times, in so many patient and polished ways, that Joanna had eventually stopped hearing it as what it actually was. I listened to all of it without interrupting once. Then I placed the wedding program on the table between us. Her name in the processional. Blake's name. Conrad Whitfield's name. The blank space where mine should have been. I slid the letter across the table without a word. She read it slowly. The kitchen was completely still. When she finished, she looked up at me. I stood up and made the tea. Before she left, she said 4 words. Quietly at the door, with her hand on the frame. I am so sorry. I squeezed her hand once and told her that was enough. The wedding program was reprinted. My name appeared in the processional where it had always belonged. On a Saturday in June, I stood at the entrance of the Whitmore Estate in a navy blue suit I had purchased specifically for this day. The same shade Miriam once told me made me look like a man worth trusting. The fabric was good. The shoes were polished. I had taken my time that morning. The estate was beautiful in the June light. White stone, tall windows, a ceremony lawn that the photographs would make look like something from a film. I could see why Joanna had wanted it. I could see why Miriam would have loved it. I found Joanna at the end of the preparation corridor. She looked at me for a moment before taking my arm. The way a person looks at something they nearly lost and are only now fully understanding the value of. The music began. I walked my daughter down the aisle and did not rush a single step of it. At the reception, the room was warm and full. Dinner was served, toasts were made, the evening moved forward the way a well-run celebration does, carrying everyone along with it. Conrad rose for the first toast of the evening. He was a decent man who knew nothing of what had happened. He spoke warmly about both families and thanked everyone for being present. Then Blake stood up. He was not scheduled to speak until later. But he stood, and the room settled, and he raised his glass and spoke clearly and without notes. He said he wanted to acknowledge the person responsible for making the entire event possible. He said the word entire deliberately. He named me. He described the gift, not as family savings Joanna had access to, but as $84,000 from an account that Franklin and the late Miriam had built together over 37 years. He said Miriam's name out loud in that room. Then he turned to me directly and said, "This day exists because of you." The applause started immediately, full, genuine, and filling every corner of that beautiful room. Patrice did not applaud. Every person who did turned her silence into the loudest thing in the room. I am sitting on the same porch where the mail arrived that Wednesday afternoon. The evening is warm. The neighborhood is settling into itself the way neighborhoods do at this hour. A lawnmower somewhere down the street, children a few houses over, the last of the day's light sitting gold and unhurried on the rooftops. I am holding Miriam's photograph. The one from our 25th anniversary. She is laughing at something off camera, and her eyes are completely alive. I have looked at this photograph more times than I can count. Tonight it feels different. Tonight I am not looking at it in grief. I am reporting back. I think about Patrice and what she built her entire plan around. Image, appearances, and the way things looked in a room full of people whose opinion she valued most. She did not understand something fundamental. The image she created, the image that now lives in the memory of every person in that reception room, is the image of her own son standing up at his wedding and honoring the man she had tried to erase. She handed Blake that moment by making the situation what it was. And the record that Beverly amended, the clean, accurate, fully annotated payment record sitting in the Whitmore Estate files, made sure that when Blake stood up and described what I had given, every word he said was already documented and verifiable. I want to say one final thing to you directly before this story ends. If you have given something significant to someone you love, your money, your time, your sacrifice, and you are being treated as though that gift has made you smaller rather than larger in their eyes, you are not confused and you are not wrong about what you are seeing. Do not give quietly and then disappear quietly. Miriam did not spend 37 years building something, so that the record could be rewritten by someone who was not in the room. Neither did I. If you stayed with Franklin from that Wednesday afternoon on the porch all the way to this moment, thank you. Genuinely. You watched a man discover that the daughter he gave everything to had allowed someone else to erase him from the most important day of her life. And you watched him respond not with rage, not with threats, and not with a single dramatic confrontation. He responded with one phone call, one letter, and the unshakable decision to show up with his dignity completely intact. Here is what I need you to do right now. All three of these matter more than you know. 1. If you or someone you love has ever been taken advantage of by family, financially, emotionally, or in any other way, drop a comment below right now. You do not need to use your name. You do not need to share more than you are comfortable with. But your words in this comment section may be exactly what someone needs to read at 2 in the morning when they are sitting alone trying to decide whether what they are feeling is real. It is real, and your comment tells them so. 2. Subscribe to this channel right now and hit the notification bell. Every single week we tell stories like Franklin's. Stories about real people who refused to be made invisible, who held their ground with dignity, and who found justice in the most unexpected places. You need to be here for every one of them. 3. Share this video with one person over 55 that you care about. Not because it is a good story, though it absolutely is, because the truth inside it may be the exact thing they need to hear before they hand over something they cannot get back. Franklin is 68 years old. He walked his daughter down the aisle. He said Miriam's name in that room. And on the porch that evening, with her photograph in his hands and the neighborhood settling quietly around him, he smiled.